I never suspected the woman I called my wife for 7 years was living a life so different from the one she presented to me. From our first date, she seemed to be everything I wanted: intelligent, kind, and passionate about her work. She and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party, and the connection felt instantaneous. We bonded over silly stories from childhood and the pizza place we both loved near my old apartment. She asked for my number at the end of the night, her smile lighting up the crowded room. Over the next few weeks, we dove headfirst into each other's worlds. I introduced her to my friends, who all commented on how lucky I was. She introduced me to her parents, who seemed to like me immediately. We spent weekends discovering new restaurants, catching movies, and talking about the future. Looking back, there were a few tiny red flags I overlooked. She rarely initiated physical contact unless we were in public, where it seemed almost performative. Every time I asked about her past relationships, she glossed over details with a vague comment about a painful breakup she preferred not to discuss. I assumed she needed time to open up, so I gave her space. At that point, I had no reason to doubt her sincerity. When she told me she wanted to get married, I was elated. I proposed under twinkling fairy lights in my backyard. She said yes, her voice trembling with what I thought was joy. A year later, we had a small ceremony by a lake with just our closest friends and family. She wore a radiant smile that day, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. Now, I see I was blinded by the illusion she crafted. I didn't see it. After the wedding, life settled into a comfortable routine, at least on the surface. We both worked demanding jobs, so our weekdays were busy. Most evenings, we cooked simple dinners and shared details of our day. She was attentive, always asking about the projects I was managing, even offering advice when I ran into snags with my team. On weekends, she'd plan day trips to local museums or suggest spontaneous drives to scenic spots. But behind the scenes, our intimacy was practically non-existent. I tried to address it several times, but she insisted she was just tired or stressed. She'd give me a half-hearted kiss and promise we'd find our spark again soon. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. When the topic of children came up, she seemed hesitant, claiming we should wait until our finances were stable. I've always been a planner, so I saw the logic. Yet, a tiny voice in my head kept whispering that something was off. I'd see her on her phone late at night, texting someone who never appeared in her public chats. Once, I asked her directly if there was someone else, and she snapped at me, accusing me of paranoia. She reminded me that I had no evidence of wrongdoing, and she was right. I felt guilty for doubting her, so I swallowed my suspicions. Months turned into years, and I grew increasingly frustrated with our lack of intimacy. Our sex life was nearly non-existent, and whenever we did try, it felt forced. She seemed almost relieved when it was over. Still, I told myself all marriages had rough patches and that we'd eventually find common ground. I didn't want to give up on the woman I'd vowed to love and support. I was naive. I didn't suspect betrayal. I remember the day I discovered the truth with perfect clarity. I had come home early from work, having felt under the weather. She was away on a business trip, or so she'd claimed. I went into our bedroom intending to crash when her laptop chimed. It was still on the bed, half open. I'm not proud of invading her privacy, but something compelled me to check. The messages I found were explicit and left no room for misinterpretation. The chat wasn't with a man, it was with a woman named Melanie. At first, I was confused, thinking maybe it was just innocent flirting or role-playing. But as I scrolled further, the conversation revealed they'd been meeting regularly. My wife wrote about how hard it was pretending to be straight, about feeling trapped in a loveless marriage. She admitted she had never been physically attracted to me or to any man at all. She mentioned that her parents pushed her into marrying someone acceptable and that she felt obligated to make them happy. My stomach churned as I read her words. She sounded resentful, describing every romantic gesture I'd ever made as if it were a prison sentence. The entire chat was a testament to how little she valued our relationship. She also wrote that she feared what would happen if she told me the truth, that I might divorce her and ruin her image. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My entire marriage felt like a sham, a facade she maintained out of duty. I took pictures of the conversation with my phone, numb and trembling. In that moment, I realized nothing about our relationship had been genuine. I wanted to scream. Instead, I calmly closed the laptop and left the house. My world came crashing down. After my initial shock, I contacted a lawyer friend to understand my options. I wanted a divorce, but I knew this would be complicated. Our finances were intertwined, and we'd purchased a home together just 2 years prior. We also lived in a community property state, which meant splitting assets could get messy. My friend advised me to gather as much evidence as possible before confronting her, especially if I suspected she might try to manipulate the narrative. I spent the next few days going through her laptop again, screenshotting every incriminating message I could find. I discovered that Melanie wasn't the only woman she'd been seeing, although she seemed to be the main one. There were old chat logs dating back years. Some were short-lived flings, while others stretched on for months. My stomach turned as I realized she'd been living this double life almost since the beginning of our relationship. Each message was like a dagger to my heart. The hardest part was reading how she justified her lies to these women. She claimed she felt forced to marry me because her parents threatened to cut her off financially. They were conservative, and she worried that coming out would destroy her relationship with them. But in these same chats, she also badmouthed me, painting me as clueless and gullible. She bragged about how easily she deceived me, how simple it was to keep me in the dark because I trusted her completely. Rage simmered just beneath my skin every time I read a new line of text. Yet, I kept my composure. I needed to plan my next steps carefully. Once I had enough proof, I decided I would confront her. I knew there was no going back. I was ready to face whatever storm followed. No mercy. She returned from her so-called business trip a few days later. I waited until she was settled, then calmly asked to talk. We sat in the living room, and I told her I knew everything. I watched the color drain from her face as I mentioned Melanie's name. She tried to deny it at first, stuttering excuses about misinterpretation. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots. She froze. For a moment, I thought she might break down and confess. Instead, she began to blame her parents and society, claiming she had no choice but to marry me. She swore she tried to make the relationship work and begged me to keep it all quiet for the sake of her reputation. I felt a mixture of anger and pity. I told her I wanted a divorce. She lost it, sobbing that I was turning my back on her in her time of need. She threatened to tell everyone I was abusive if I tried to leave. Her personality changed from vulnerable to vicious in seconds. I quietly reminded her that I had everything on record. She paled again. That's when she offered a solution. She wanted me to stay married to her, but allow her to see women on the side. In exchange, she wouldn't tarnish my name. I stared at her in disbelief. When I refused, she stormed off, claiming I'd regret my decision. I didn't hear from her for 2 days. Then she came home with a wild plan to fix us. She'd invited Melanie over, she said, and wanted me to see if we could all make it work. My stomach churned. I said no. She accused me of not being open-minded. I realized this was only the beginning of her manipulations. Truly horrifying. 2 nights later, I came home to find a strange car parked in our driveway. Inside, I heard laughter from the bedroom. My heart pounded as I took cautious steps down the hallway. When I opened the door, I found Melanie sitting on the bed, completely naked. My wife stood beside her, grinning triumphantly like she'd staged some grand surprise. I was speechless. She tried to usher me in, saying this was how we'd fix everything. If I joined them, she reasoned, maybe I'd learn to accept her true nature. My mind reeled. I demanded both of them leave. Melanie looked uncomfortable, like she hadn't fully agreed to this plan, but my wife urged her to stay put. I lost my temper and yelled at them to get out. Finally, Melanie grabbed her clothes and left. My wife stood there, hands on her hips, telling me I was overreacting. She claimed this could have been an opportunity for us to explore new possibilities. I didn't bother responding. I left the room, grabbed my keys, and drove away. I spent the night in a hotel, unable to process how far she was willing to go. The next morning, I met with my lawyer friend again and told him everything. He insisted I file for divorce immediately, given her increasingly erratic behavior. That same day, I texted her that I wanted her out of the house until we could settle things. She bombarded me with messages, fluctuating between anger and desperation. She apologized, then threatened me, then apologized again. She refused to leave the house, claiming it was also hers. I realized I had to prepare for a fight. If she wanted a war, I was ready to wage one. I would not back down this time. I absolutely vowed to prevail. The next few weeks were a nightmare. She refused to leave, so we ended up living under the same roof in complete hostility. I moved my things into the guest bedroom and locked the door at night. She pounded on it, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming insults. I recorded everything, just in case. My lawyer filed the divorce papers, but she contested them, claiming emotional distress and spousal abuse. She actually went to her parents and told them I'd physically hurt her. Thankfully, I had no contact orders from my colleagues who had seen my bruises were non-existent. Her accusations found little traction. Still, she made every day a living hell. She left threatening notes on my car, tampered with my work files by logging into my computer, and told mutual friends outrageous stories about how I'd exploited her. I started losing sleep, worried she might escalate further. My lawyer advised me to get a restraining order, but I feared that might make her even more unpredictable. Meanwhile, she kept having secret phone calls with Melanie, locked away in the bathroom for hours. One night, I overheard her complaining to Melanie that I refused to just let her be herself. She also admitted she had no intention of letting me go easily because her reputation and financial security were on the line. That was my breaking point. I decided if she wanted to fight dirty, so would I. I had enough evidence to destroy her claims of abuse. I had documentation of her extramarital affairs. I even discovered financial irregularities. She'd been siphoning money from our joint account into a separate one for months. Once I uncovered that, I knew I had her cornered. It was time to set my revenge plan in motion. No more compromises. I would definitely end all this. First, I leaked just enough information to her parents to make them question her saintly narrative. I didn't reveal everything, only that she had been unfaithful multiple times and was trying to frame me as an abuser. Their reactions were mixed. Her mother called me, crying, swearing she had no idea. Her father, on the other hand, threatened me, demanding I keep their family name out of the mud. I recorded that call too. Next, I reached out to a mutual friend who had a strong moral compass. I showed her proof that my wife had manipulated both me and several women. She was horrified. Word spread quietly among our close circle, and soon my wife found herself isolated. Some people took her side at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Then I tackled the financial side. Through my lawyer, I presented the court with bank statements showing how she'd funneled money into her personal account. She claimed it was for household expenses, but the transactions lined up suspiciously with her secret hotel rendezvous. My lawyer also argued that her attempt to coerce me into an unwanted threesome was emotional abuse. We filed for a protective order based on her threats and erratic behavior. The court granted a temporary restraining order, forcing her to leave the house. She screamed at me in the courtroom, calling me every name under the sun, but I remained stoic. Finally, with her out of the house, I felt some peace. My revenge was legal, methodical, and ruthless. I wanted her to suffer the consequences of her deception. She tried to contact me through mutual friends, crying that she was broke and homeless. I refused to engage. I kept pressing forward with the divorce. She had lost her leverage. Her downfall had only just begun. As the divorce proceedings progressed, my wife attempted every trick in the book. She played the victim, claiming I drove her to mental instability. She forged text messages to make it look like I was the one who suggested inviting Melanie into our marriage. My lawyer countered each lie with solid evidence, including timestamps and witness statements. Slowly but surely, the judge saw through her facade. When it came time for the financial settlement, the court uncovered her hidden account and ruled that she had intentionally misused marital funds. She was ordered to reimburse me a substantial amount. Moreover, her attempts to paint me as abusive collapsed when confronted with the recordings of her threats and the testimonies of people who knew us both. In the end, the judge granted me a favorable settlement. The house would be sold and the proceeds split evenly, but I would be compensated for the stolen funds and legal fees. She would walk away with much less than she'd anticipated. I found out later that her parents, upon learning the extent of her lies and manipulations, had cut her off financially. Melanie, too, seemed to have vanished from her life. Perhaps she realized my wife's behavior was too toxic to endure. Regardless, I felt no sympathy. Every time I remembered how she tried to force me into a humiliating threesome, and then threatened me with false abuse claims. My resolve hardened. I refused to be guilt-tripped. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt like a massive weight had lifted from my shoulders. My ex-wife tried one last time to contact me, leaving a voicemail that oscillated between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for ruining her life. I deleted it without listening to the rest. I was finally free. I never looked back. In the aftermath, I moved into a new apartment and cut ties with anyone who insisted on straddling the fence. My true friends supported me, knowing I'd endured years of deception and betrayal. I took time off work to travel solo, clearing my head and remembering what it felt like to be unburdened. Healing wasn't immediate, but each day I felt a little lighter. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she tried to rebuild her life in another city, spinning new narratives to gain sympathy. I didn't care. She was no longer my problem. People ask if I've forgiven her. The answer is no. I don't believe in granting forgiveness to someone who hasn't shown genuine remorse. She lied to me, wasted years of my life, and then tried to ruin me when I wouldn't comply with her twisted plans. The best I can do is move forward and live a life that doesn't revolve around her memory. And that's what I've done. My career flourished after I returned, largely because I was no longer weighed down by her constant drama. I made new friends, dated casually, and eventually found someone who genuinely cared about me. But I made sure to be completely honest about my past and my boundaries. I'm sharing my story here because people keep asking if I regret anything. I regret not seeing the signs sooner, but I don't regret exposing her lies. Revenge doesn't have to be violent. Sometimes the best revenge is refusing to play the victim and using every legal avenue to protect yourself. I refused to be complicit in her facade, and I fought back when she tried to destroy me. In the end, I emerged stronger. It's ironic how her efforts to fix our marriage only fixed one thing: my resolve.